Hello, everyone, and hello, Nate.
Hello, Greg. Hello, all the folks out there on the internet ready to talk birds and birding with us again today. We're excited to have you. My name is Nate Swick. I am joined by my colleague, Greg Neise, to talk birds and birding in our bi weekly, a lot of bees in that. Birds, the thing they've got this little filter here. Birds and birding in our bi weekly program called What's This Bird Live? We're excited to have you here to talk about difficult bird identification, flamingos. Why not? It's the thing. It's the thing to talk about
That's
these days.
that is the thing. Well, I guess we'll just jump right into that.
I,
Um,
I mean, we got to vamp. We got to vamp where people come in.
well,
Those of you who are here early can listen to us talk about the
Christy Bass
flamingo
says
bingo
hello
going
from
on
East Tennessee.
all over
Um,
the part of the continent.
Christy needs to get over to West. Well, let's see, where are they in Tennessee? Are they in East or West?
South Central, I believe.
South Central.
They're right in the middle.
That's
Yeah.
where the flamingos are in Tennessee. Yeah, that is, we don't use the word unprecedented very often when we talk about birds moving around, because if you've been doing this for a while like we have, you've seen all kinds
Everything
of
is
things.
precedented. Yeah.
Everything from, even, it's like you see the wandering stellar sea eagle and you're like, that's
That's cool.
that's
Yeah,
remarkable, but birds move. But
this is something weird.
this is unprecedented. And so, for
Yeah.
those of you who might possibly not be aware, but um, at count now, over 250, somewhere between 250 and 300 American flamingos got picked up by Hurricane Idalia and dumped across the across the eastern part of the United States.
Yeah, most of
And
them in the path of the storm, or at least sort of
yes,
roughly in the path of the storm. Though there have been some that were spun out extremely beyond beyond the path of the storm. There were birds on the Gulf Coast of Texas. That was pretty far out there. There were birds in southern Ohio. There were birds in Kentucky. There were birds in Pennsylvania now. American flamingo in Pennsylvania. I don't think that was
Indiana,
on anyone's list. I
North
don't think that
Carolina,
was on.
South Carolina,
Yeah.
for
Yeah, we
I
just
think
had one in
Virginia.
Raleigh reported this morning. Someone photographed an American flamingo in Raleigh, which, if you're familiar with North Carolina geography, is not the coast where the flock of 11 to 13 have been hanging out for the better part of a week, as well inland. So maybe that's a sign that the birds that got scattered are kind of slowly making their way back to saltwater where they prefer, whether these
Yeah,
nasty
well,
little farm ponds and reservoirs and whatnot.
and a couple of things. One, I think, Nate, we've been talking about the origin of these birds for quite some for
Mm-hmm.
since it happened now, in
Mm-hmm.
the last week. And yeah, it's one of the birds is banded, and it was
At least
banded.
three of them have been banned.
Oh, at least three of them. Okay, well,
Yeah.
one of them is identified. It's 23-year-old bird from Rio Lagarto on the Yucatan, and I
Yeah,
think
north
that
side of the Yucatan. Yep.
and birds in storms like this, if they're on the ground, they tend to stay on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's the birds that are in flight, out on the ocean, that get picked up by the storms and thrown inland,
Mm-hmm.
or thrown out of range mostly. When hurricanes go over the Caribbean islands, you don't really see very many passerines, but you see a lot of water birds that are
Mm-hmm.
out over the open ocean. So I think that, you kind of surmise, just as we're talking about stuff, a theory that maybe a flock of flamingos, a group was flying across the Caribbean from Mexico to Cuba, which they do.
Yeah. Quite close together at that point.
It's 68 miles, I think.
Is that it?
Um,
Wow. I didn't
yeah,
realize it was that
it's
short.
not. It's
Yeah.
not very far at all, and they got picked up by this storm, and tossed into Florida. But
Mm-hmm.
what's cool is that flamingos are hardy birds. People don't realize it because they're so tall and thin and spindly and elegant looking.
Gangly.
But they are hardy birds. I worked at a zoo in Chicago, and we had flamingos that were out until it froze. American. Well, no, I think they were Chilean, which are a southern species, which are pretty used to cold temperatures. But
Yeah.
flamingos in
High
general,
altitude birds. Yep.
flamingos in general are hardy birds.
Mm-hmm.
And I, this story is still being written. I mean, this is a great time to be alive.
I know both you and I have talked to a bunch of media
Yes.
about it, which has been cool. I'm glad that people are thinking of the ABA when they want an explanation for weird bird phenomenon. That's always very nice. It's nice to feel wanted. But everyone, there's something about flamingos. You know, birders are very familiar with this sort of phenomenon of storm-blown birds getting washed into places that you don't expect them. That's something that we've been very familiar with for decades now. Flamingos are something different. Flamingos are this weird bird that when that happens, they are actually going to intersect with the non-birding population, and people are going to want to talk about that.
Absolutely.
And so it's been cool to talk about the
Absolutely.
greater phenomenon of storm waifs, storm-blown birds, within the context of this pretty wild flamingo explosion. Which, you know, the summer of Barbie, everything's pink, even our wind waifs.
Yeah, Barbie thought they were making some news. No,
Yeah, we got the
uh,
pink stuff cornered. Thanks, Barbie.
we do. Yeah, Susan Nelson asked a question that's on a lot of people's minds, and that is, how does this impact the wild population of flamingos? Not at all, because these are wild birds, and these are wild birds that are being moved around. And you know, the one thing that I've said to several reporters this week is that birds move. That's what they do. They are uniquely adapted to living on Earth, on a round planet where they can move all over the place. And the interesting thing here is that most of these birds wound up in a place where historically they lived. I mean, American flamingos used to breed in Florida.
Yeah, there are
And,
records of them in the Keys, at least, and there was a large population in the Bahamas, as Amy Davis wrote in a recent hurricane
we'll talk about
Idalia
that in a minute.
cover thing, for on the ABA.com, which I recommend everyone read. They used to pretty regularly get blown over into Florida and end up in Florida. That population, that colony, kind of winked out, but there are still some sizable American flamingo colonies in the Yucatan, as we know, and in Cuba, and on the Dominican Republic and the island of Hispaniola. So there are flamingos kind of all in the greater Antilles, along the coast there, and they do pretty well. I've seen them in a lot of those countries. I remember seeing them in Cuba. There's a bunch of them in Cuba.
Yep, and it is it is entirely possible that a breeding population is reestablished in Florida as a result of this.
Wouldn't that be wild?
Because, you know, we've seen it happen before where birds wind up in places where they find it conducive, at like the Steller sea eagle. He's just hanging out.
Well, Limpkins. The Limpkin is the story here.
Oh yeah, of course, Limpkins. I forgot about the Limpkins. How could that be?
Look, Greg, here in North Carolina where I live, we had the largest flock outside of Florida. It was 11 birds.
Right.
That was augmented by 2 more a few days later. It might have been the 2 birds that were seen up the coast a little ways in Virginia. Pea Island and Newport News, Virginia, are not all that far away as the flamingo flies. And if they end up nesting here like the American avocets did like 4 or 5 decades ago, that would be pretty awesome. I would feel better about missing them this time. I haven't been able to get out there.
Yeah,
the island's a long way away.
They're hardy birds. They're strong flyers. So, sorry, I got a little distracted here by a comment on Facebook. Pinky, the St. Mark's flamingo, has a flock now. So that's right.
Pinky's been there for a few years now, right?
Pinky's been there for
at least
3
5.
years.
3 years.
3,
yeah,
5
Berry,
years.
yeah.
And
it's
it
been a
came
while.
through on. Pinky showed up after Hurricane Marco, I believe.
I think it was Barry, but I'm not
or
sure.
Or Barry? Okay.
It showed
I don't
know
I
don't keep track of my hurricanes, and also the last 4 or 5 years have been a complete blur. So
yes, this is true. Originally seen in Texas, if I'm remembering correctly, wound up in Tennessee, and then in the Missouri boot heel.
Yeah, for a few days.
It's very widely thought that Pinky is that bird that made it back to Florida and has been living at St. Mark's for the last 3 years or more.
Yeah.
And now is joined by Hurricane Michael, Daphne and Rose say. I thought it was an M word. But now Pinky has a bunch of friends, and who knows what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
And,
I mean,
you
no, there
know,
was one that stuck around in Laguna Atascosa in South Texas for many, many years too in the
yeah.
90s. I remember I saw that one. So, yeah, maybe
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
look, we're saying they will survive. I don't know, they won't all survive. That's the way these things go, but
right.
as we said, flamingos are big birds. They are hardy birds. There's a
Yep.
good chance that a lot of them are going to make it back or find a place. It's we'll see. We'll see. The story is still being written, as you said, Greg.
Yes, it is. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens here. And what's also fascinating is the number of young birds. And
Yeah, it's a lot of young birds. Yep.
I think a third to a half of them appear to be,
Yeah,
this year's birds.
in the North Carolina flock, only 3 adults,
Yeah.
8 young birds. Yeah.
So, with that,
If you want to know more,
if you want to know more, Amy Davis, as Nate said earlier, has written a wonderful report
yeah, it's fabulous.
on these flamingos and also some historical notes. Go to
Historical
aba.org.
stuff
You'll
is
see this
fantastic.
graphic on our homepage. Click
I'll put
that
the link in
and
the notes. I'll put the link.
go in there and read this report. It's wonderful. So just a couple of
Amy
quick
did a
shout
great
outs
job.
before we jump into our birds here. Christopher Dean from Virginia says hi. Elise May, how you doing? And I think we've got folks on YouTube as well.
We do. We have a lot, and I'll as soon as I finish copy and pasting this thing. I can't do two things at once. I can't type and talk at the same time.
Well, Nate is posting the Idalia report.
Yeah. Hello, Brent Schoenberg from Southwest Ohio. Absorbed in Nature, Russ Parsons, Jarek Bruff, Tom Green.
If
Lucy
you're on
and Bob
Facebook,
Duncan,
it's in the chat.
Scott Hickman.
If you're on Facebook, it's in the chat. Otherwise, just go to aba.org. It's right there on the homepage.
Yeah.
Okay. We got birds to talk about.
We got birds to talk about. It's fall, Greg. It's time. It's my favorite time of year for birding.
I agree.
We've started having nice, cool mornings, and it's been, even though it gets pretty hot in the afternoon, it's still down here. The mornings are cool. The birds are moving. Lots of chips. Lots of reports of stuff here and there.
I agree. And it's the weather shifted here on a dime like it tends to do when we get our first fall push. And there's warblers and migrants and things like this little first bird that we're going to talk about all over the place now. And it is my favorite time of the year.
Quebec.
It's ticking closer to November, which is my favorite month of the year.
That's right. It's gonna be hard for November to beat this summer. In addition to all, it's not often that a bird would overlook a potential first ABA area record, but the Flamingos have done it. Make a note that there was an ABA area first gray gull in Walton County, Florida this year too, or this past week as well, which is pretty phenomenal. That
is true. So here we've got our first bird of the day.
Yes, let's talk about this bird.
From Quebec. Looks like a little guy looking by the size of those oak leaves. It's hiding behind one of them there. So we got a little guy. I think we can see what we need to see to get this bird down to family pretty quickly. It's got a gray head. It's got some white around the eye. It's got big gray feet, big strong gray feet. And on the photo on the right, we can see that it has a little hook tip to its rather heavy bill. And all of those things add up to Vireo.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Greg. That bill is a no-brainer, and I love the fact that you can see the bill head on in the photo on the left. I think that's really cool, and you can even see the rictal bristles, the kind of feathers that provide the net, that kind of the gape of the adult bird that allows them to capture flying insects and stuff. You don't always see that in Vireos, but yes, definitely one of our Vireos. And based on the head pattern, I think there are probably 3 species in La Pêche, Quebec that we have to work our way through. And those are red-eyed Vireo, which also has kind of a gray cap and an eye line. Warbling Vireo, which has a gray cap and an eye line, but it's a little more washed out. And Philadelphia Vireo, which is frequently confused for warbling Vireo this time of year.
Yes. Now that wonderful shot on the right eliminates red-eyed. Red-eyed vireo has a bigger bill than this. It's got a kind of a
Indeed.
big honking bill. It has a red eye, but young birds don't necessarily show the
Sometimes
red
they're
eye
brownish, can be hard to
this
see.
time of
Yep.
year. But it also has a very well-defined supercilium, which is the eye line, and a dark line through the eye, so dark lores and then continuing past the eye. It's pretty strong. So I think we can
Indeed.
get down.
Yeah, I agree. Red-eye vireo frequently looks a bit more angry, I guess. It's
Yep.
got a flatter head. It's got less of that kind of forehead angle there, and kind of looks more kind of fiercer.
Doesn't look as
This
cute
bird
as
looks
this
a lot.
guy.
It doesn't look as cute. Yeah, this is definitely a cute looking bird, a plush looking bird.
But now, getting down to the two that are left, Philadelphia and Warbling, boy, this is kind of tough with what we've got here. On the left, it looks like it's got yellow coming up all the way on the underside up into the throat. But boy, with all that green around it, that could be reflection from the leaves.
Yep. This does look a little blown out.
And maybe a little bit of oversaturation from the camera. You know, these things are hard to tell. And the photo on the left, it looks like it has dark lores, which would favor Philadelphia.
Indeed.
But on the picture on the right, boy, those lores just kind of disappear.
They do.
And if it weren't for the fact that they got a third picture of it, I would have kind of been leaning Philly, but would have left it alone. But then the third picture nails it as Philly, because now we can see those dark lores are for real, and the yellow coloration underneath is also for real because it's in
It's almost
nice.
It's so
bright
yellow, it's almost orange.
It is. It's in nice bright sunlight now, and it's not in the shade and possibly being affected by the leaves and foliage around it. So yeah, this is a Philadelphia vireo, one of the birds that I look for more in the fall than I do in the spring. In the spring, they're
me
hard.
too. They are very hard in the spring, even where I live too. They're not super easy in the fall either, but they're definitely more common in the fall too. It's worth noting that warbling vireos in the spring, especially, are very pale, very gray, very washed out. At least the ones in the east,
Yep.
which are the ones that you would be most likely to encounter in La Pêche, Quebec. In the fall, they can show a little bit of a yellow wash on the breast, so you got to kind of watch out for that. Never as bright as this one. And I think even though the photo is a little bit blown out because the bright sunlight, it's still, you still would not see anything quite that yellow. And of course, the more patterned face, warbling vireo just always to me looks very ghost-like, very pale on the
Very
face.
open
because
face,
yeah, exactly, because it lacks that dark lore, that area between the eye and the bill.
Absolutely. So this is a Philadelphia vireo.
It's funny. These fall vireos are birds that a lot of people miss because they're not familiar with their call note. But you'll find a lot more of those Philadelphia vireos, and even things like the solitary vireo complex, depending on where you are, and warbling vireos. If you key in on that call, which is like a whiny kind of gray catbird sounding kind of thing.
Yep.
I know it's very easy to toss that stuff off as a gray catbird, but if you hear it kind of a little bit higher up in the tree, definitely take a second to try and pick that out, because a lot of times you'll find a vireo.
And Phillies tend to forage higher in the trees than
Yes,
other vireos, which are kind of mid-level.
Yes.
And unless it's cold. And so if you get a cold snap, as we've said so many times, look for the goldenrods and stuff, and these birds come down and pick insects off the goldenrod. So
for sure. Red eyes especially will come pretty low. I mean, think of red-eyed vireo as a very canopy-loving species, and in the spring that's true, but in the fall they really come down.
Yeah. So now we got a thrush from Central Illinois, and this looks basically the shape of a robin, but brown with speckled breast. On the ground, we can kind of see the size of the rocks and stuff with its short, kind of thickish bill. This is one of our Catharus thrushes, which are moving through in numbers now. And what do we got?
So, what do we have? Four species of Catharus thrushes to consider, and a fifth that is extremely unlikely,
Right.
certainly in central Illinois. So we're looking at hermit thrush, Swainson's thrush, Veery, gray-cheeked thrush, and Bicknell's is sort of out there on an outlier.
Oh,
You would need to absolutely.
you left out wood
Well, wood
thrush.
thrush isn't Catharus, but it's kind of
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Catharus.
It's not.
Yeah,
That's not. You're
yeah.
right.
I think of them as sort of separate, but they are like
No,
very
they are.
closely related. Yeah.
They are, but it's funny when you see a wood thrush, like whoa, because they are.
Yeah, it's different. It's big and pot bellied and
is.
small headed. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
But this is kind of a classic Catharus, kind of sleek looking, brown with the breast. But the things I'm looking for whenever I see one of those is the overall color of the back and the head. And for this bird, all the way down to the tail, this looks like kind of a grayish brown color.
Yep.
Not a lot of warmth to it at all. And also the kind of the area behind the eye. And the whole face, just in general, I'm looking for an eye ring. I don't see one here, and I'm looking for kind of pale, kind of ear marks, and I don't see that here, which would suggest to me that this is one of the gray cheek / Bicknells, probably most likely gray cheeked.
yeah, it's great. It's and the cheek you can see here is kind of gray.
Yeah, well, they
And
don't call it that for nothing. Yeah,
and as Nate was talking about here, it's kind of a gestalt thing. There's field marks with thrushes, but it's kind of the sum of the total.
exactly. Exactly.
So
It's not one thing. Yeah, it's like two or
yeah.
three things in conjunction. Yeah.
So here is the gray cheek that we're discussing in the center, with Hermit, Swainson's, and Veery around it. You'll see how Veery is the same color from head to toe as the gray cheeked is, but it's usually a richer color.
Kind of foxy.
But it can they vary. I've seen Veeries that are very close to gray cheek in color, but notice how the face and the head and everything, that it doesn't really have that same look about it, and the breast pattern is much weaker. It's not.
Yeah, it's kind of mushy. Yeah.
Yes. And even with the gray cheek being a little puffed up and the Veery being nice and tightly holding his feathers in nice and tight, the Veery typically appears to have the least amount of spotting and pattern.
Yes.
On the face, the throat, the malar. I mean, note on the gray cheek that kind of bold malar that you see
mustache thing. Yeah.
Yeah. The hermit above almost always shows an eye ring. The face is a little more strongly patterned, but it's got that bright rufous tail that it so jauntily cocks up in the air. And hermit thrushes are almost always pretty easily identifiable. And then we've got Swainson's, and Swainson's was called olive-back thrush for a while, and it really is the most olive of our thrushes. But note the face pattern; it's got that bold kind of buffy eye ring, and the lores are the same color, and it's got kind of a buffyish wash to the face, which gives it a very different look from the gray cheek.
Yeah, indeed. And it's kind of got the pale on the face kind of goes up around the eye, almost like a little kind of crescent, not around on the eye, the ear rather, around the back of the face. And it just makes the face kind of busier, I guess, when you see it as Swainson starts. There's just more going on there. Whereas gray cheeked, every time I see one, I'm immediately drawn to the fact that there is not a lot of pattern on that face, at least, not above that malar. It does have kind of a very, very distinct malar, but the face looks very plain. It's almost like the warbling Vireo to our Philadelphia Vireo a little bit here when we're talking about that sort of thing.
Yeah,
I always think of hermit thrush as being a very late migrant too. So a lot of times the Swainson's, gray cheeks, and Veeries are gone by a couple weeks gone before the hermit thrushes start to show up, when the sparrows start showing up and the kind of the true birds of winter.
Yeah, and
because it's a wintering resident across much of the South.
Yes, and it is a winter resident in central Illinois, hermit thrush. And
hermit really? Even that far north? Yeah.
Yep. Not in big numbers. Down in southern Illinois, definitely.
Yeah, I bet so.
Which is, along the Ohio River and Shawnee National Forest in those areas. And but yeah, hermit thrushes tend to show up with the white-throated sparrows and the first juncos and those birds. Whereas gray-cheeked and Swainson's, they tend to show up with the warblers and the rest of the neotropical migrants.
Yeah, they're very long-winged, long distance migrants as well. If you get a kind of a look at it's hard, kind of a little bit harder to tell here. You can tell it with the Swainsons versus the hermit thrush in this nice composite you made, Greg. Is that the Swainsons is very long wings compared to that hermit thrush. They're not quite as long. The Swainsons goes all the way into Amazon basin to winter in the northern Andes. So they've got a long way to go, whereas the hermit thrush is a relatively short distance migrant. Breeds across they breed the farthest north, but they only go about as far as the southeastern southern United States to winter. Do they?
I think Great Cheek is because Great Cheek breeds in the willows right up to the edge of the tundra.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. They go all the way across the Bering Sea too, don't they?
They do. They're the only one of our thrushes that actually breeds in Russia.
In East Russia, yeah.
Yeah. So they are the longest distant migrant of all of them, I believe.
I realize we're doing a little bit of East Coast bias too. Absorbed in Nature, thank you for that on YouTube. Notes that hermit thrush winters to British Columbia along the west coast. That kind of coastal forest where the temperature is moderated by the Pacific Ocean a little bit has a lot of really cool wintering birds, including like Anna's hummingbird and a bunch of warblers as well. Thank you for noting that. Thank you for calling us out. Yeah, Xantu's hummingbird. Well, one time.
Okay. From Winnipeg.
Oh, Mary Hansen asks, I have one question on YouTube I want
sure.
to call to. Mary Hansen asks, is there a reason to note the orange color at the base of the beak on the gray cheek? I don't know if you could pull that back just
let's see what she's
here. Talking about there.
Not really. They all tend to show
a little bit of that. Yeah.
Some kind of that yellowish at the base of the bill. So I really wouldn't focus on that. I would focus on the overall plumage and the face pattern, and not the bill so much.
Yeah, you notice the Swainsons has a little bit of it too.
Yeah, and the Vireos does too.
Mm-hmm.
And the hermit thrush just might have a dirty bill.
Yeah.
So back to Winnipeg. This is a little bird that causes a lot of confusion this time of year.
Indeed. So I think we're looking at a perching bird.
Yeah.
Seems pretty
Looks
obvious.
Like cattails.
Yep, for sure. I think the posture of this bird is a good place to start because comparing it to the hermit thrush or the thrushes just in general that we saw in the previous slide, they have very horizontal look as they were sitting on the ground. There's really not too many groups of birds, certainly not in North America, that have that upright posture that we so associate with our flycatchers.
Yes, and looking at this bird, we can see that it has a dark tail, a long dark tail, kind of brownish back with these bold kind of buffy wing bars and a dark.
Yeah, it looks totally
head.
Green, Greg. What's going on with that green back?
I think the back is being influenced by
there's a cat
something
tail in front of it,
out of focus in front of it.
Yeah,
which is the biggest pitfall of doing this is photographs. Because
the limitations of photographs.
Things happen in photographs that you would never consider when you're actually looking at the bird. If there's a cattail in front of it, you either ignore it or take a step to the left or the right. But long telephoto lenses,
your brain does a good job like blocking that out.
It does. But long telephoto lenses have a way of making things disappear in the foreground. But still having some influence over color tone and exposure. And it can really cause some interesting ID conundrums. Yeah. But the thing I'm noticing about this bird is that it's got really short wings. The primaries are very short and the tail is very long.
Barely get beyond the base of the tail.
Yeah, and that the fact that the face is so dark, and the wings are so short and the tail is so long, all of that kind of pushes the Empedonyx flycatchers out the door. They tend to be squatter. They tend to be long distance migrants, except for least. But least flycatcher would have a bold eye ring, and and would still have a shorter tail and longer wings than this bird.
Mm-hmm.
Of the other
Bigger head,
flycatchers,
smaller body, comparatively,
exactly.
proportionally. Yeah.
The wood peewees, eastern and western wood peewee, long distance neotropic migrants. They have long wings that are very apparent in a view like this. So that really only leaves us with one bird.
Yeah, there aren't too many flycatchers that are as lanky as this bird is. Like it looks very long. The body and the head, I should say, look very long, whereas the wings do not. And maybe that is part of the reason why the wings look as short as they do, is because the rest of the bird just kind of looks like kind of elongated. But lack of features, kind of pale. Aside from the pale wing bars, gray all over. This is a rough-looking eastern Phoebe.
Yeah, and I believe that the bold kind of buffy wing bars would make this a young bird.
So this year's bird.
And it looks like the face is the head is molting out of juvenile plumage and into that first year plumage, because the rest of the bird looks kind of neat and clean.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the things that this photo doesn't show, that it is always a great field mark for eastern Phoebe, is when you see them perched here, is that they're almost always flicking their tail. Not constantly, but, every 10, 15 seconds, they're going to pop that tail out a little bit. And most other flycatchers, with a few exceptions, don't do that. At least not too many flycatchers where in the range of this one in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Gray flycatcher kind of famously does that tail flipping thing as well. But I don't think you'd see a gray flycatcher in Manitoba. That would be very unusual.
Yeah. And one last thing before we get past the Phoebe here, we got a good view of the feet, and this bird has pretty big, strong-looking feet. Peewees have ridiculously small feet, short little legs and small feet, and they look almost like swallows when they're sitting, because their feet are just so small and kind of silly looking. Okay, so we have a young eastern Phoebe here from Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Indeed.
And now kind of bouncing over to Minnesota, it is fall warbler time. And,
for sure. And we know this is a warbler. We can compare it to that Vireo that we had at the very beginning. You notice that this bill is not quite as hefty. It does not have a hook at the tip. So this is definitely not a Vireo bill. This is a warbler, as we said.
It is, and it doesn't kind of look like anything. It doesn't really have any field marks, which in itself is a field mark.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of got a neat little pattern there on the wrist, on the bend of the wing there. I don't think there's anything there that's going to make any difference with our identification, but I just kind of found that kind of interesting.
No, and it's got kind of yellowish underneath and kind of yellowish all over, and it's got a nice little eye ring. But we look at our warblers with eye rings, sort of the Connecticuts and the Mornings, that group. The structure is off for this bird. It doesn't have any gray on the head. Those birds also have big pink feet. This bird has black legs. And note the kind of the way the feather edgings that we can see, and we can see them quite well, both in the wing and the tail, are also yellow. This bird has a lot of yellow.
A lot of yellow on it. No wing bars either, as Jamie Nalesny in Facebook helpfully points out. Yeah, we're not seeing much of anything.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
If I were to name this bird, having not seen it before in my life, I would probably call this a yellow warbler. And as it turns out, let's just capitalize yellow and warbler, and there's your species name, yellow warbler.
Tick that one off on the day list.
Yellowest warbler.
It is the yellowest warbler.
Most yellow warbler. There's a lot of yellow warblers, but it is the most yellow.
In addition to warblers, it is the beginning of hawkwatch season.
Indeed.
And these come from Toronto.
More Canadian birds. Love it.
Yeah. So I got a comp coming up, but we'll talk about it more in the comp. But, what do we got here? I mean, it looks like there's some markings on the belly. The bird looks overall compact.
Is this the same bird?
Same bird. 2 shots of the same bird.
That's useful to know. I think that the photo on the left is much more useful for its identification than the photo on the right, where the bird
Mm-hmm.
looks to be in mid flap, and so the shape of the wing is sort of distorted. Because the shape of the wing on this bird is one of the field marks that I'm most looking for. So focusing on the photo on the left, this is a very compact hawk
Mm-hmm.
with relatively short wings. It's got not a lot of pattern on the underside of those wings, but what it does have is this really nice, clean black Sharpie marker that has been drawn all around the edges of those pointed, kind of paddle shaped wings. Looks like it's got a
Mm-hmm.
hood a little bit too, not much on the tail. But if I see a bird with that shape, I am thinking one thing, Greg. It is broad winged hawk.
Yeah, and if we compare it with other birds that are commonly flying around in the eastern half of the country this time of year, we have the two birds, the two pictures of the bird in question on the right. Um, and then the rest of these, the other six, are birds that I photographed while sitting in my backyard. I finally get a chance to use these pictures.
Yeah, nice.
Um, yeah,
A little Jerry
I'm
Ligori
lucky.
action going on here.
Thank you for that compliment. Um, I am lucky in that I am between Lake Michigan and a river, and when the wind is correct, I get a lot of hawks flying over my backyard at the right time of year.
Yeah.
I think I've seen 16 species of hawkwatch birds from my 20 by 35-foot brick patio in the backyard.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fantastic. Hawks are kind of unique, or raptors just in general, because they're diurnal migrants.
yeah,
Almost exclusively, most of our passerines are nocturnal migrants, but hawks are diurnal. They migrate during the day, and they very much closely tied to landforms that they use as way markers as they migrate south. So this is why we have so many great hawk migration spots along the Appalachians, because they follow the Appalachian Ridge all the way down, and the sides of lakefronts, and between a lakefront and a river, that is like perfect. It's a hawk highway you got there,
yep,
Greg. And
and
so they
and
love to follow
also
rivers and mountains and lake
and
shores.
also out west the Front Ranges,
Mm-hmm.
in Colorado and in the Great Basin, and in California where the the, the
Mm-hmm.
mountains form paths for these birds to follow. It's surmised, getting back to that stellar sea eagle. Those birds live basically in the North Pacific on the Asian side of the Pacific, and it's surmised that that bird followed the Rocky Mountains all the way down to Texas, where it was seen
Mm-hmm.
for a day, and then turned around and went the opposite direction and followed the coast up to the Maritimes. Um,
Wow, I missed it.
but
Missed it, North Carolina.
getting back to the birds we're talking about here. So on the right, we have the broad-winged,
Mm-hmm.
as Nate identified. And as you can see, um, the broad-winged hawk, the wingtip is kind of a unique shape. In the
Yeah.
center, we have three red-tailed hawks, and in different plumages. And the red-tailed hawk, the first thing to notice is the dark patagials. So that is the
Fingertip.
part,
Oh, the four. I was gonna
the
mix that. It's the
patagial.
it's the forearm, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The forearm closest to the body, and you'll notice how the three the three shots of red-tailed hawks all show dark patagials, and you'll notice how the broad winged, especially the head-on one, it just clean white-ish
Mm-hmm.
underneath, um, and really no other markings. But also note the wing shape. Note how
Yeah. The wing
the
shape is what
red-tailed
stands out to me when I'm looking at broadwing hawks. It is so
e-
distinctive.
exactly.
I
I
say
mean, note
it's
the
broadwing.
two birds in the middle right. The red tail has more belly to the wing, and the red
Mm-hmm.
tail is molting. Some primaries there, but it's close enough. It's got more belly to the wing, and you're seeing these primaries separated a little bit more. It's when the broad wing is at that angle and it moves, the wingtips become pointed and almost kite
Mm-hmm.
like. It's
Yeah.
it's it's kind of a unique shape.
Yeah, you can
Um,
see the fingers on a red-tailed hawk most of the time. You can't really
Most of
see
the
those
time.
in a broad-winged hawk. Yeah, I mean that wing shape is just so distinctive. It's kind of it's broad as the name implies. It's kind of
Yes.
paddle shaped almost, or like spade shaped. Because it's got like suits of clubs and a deck of cards. It's kind of like a spade. It's broad at the base, and then it kind of comes to a point at the top. And that is just it just screams broad-winged hawk if you're ever flying one. It's immediately obvious to you if you're seeing them fly over.
Absolutely. And Broadwing also tends to be more compact looking overall, and I think you
Yeah,
can see that in these photos.
for sure.
The tail is shorter, and it often looks like you'll see on the bird the photo on the right lower. It's the tail is like it's almost connected directly to the wings. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it gives that appearance. So the three birds on the left are red-shouldered hawks,
Yeah.
and red-shouldered hawk is kind of a it's kind of an interesting bird at hawk watches because it can be really confusing. But then it'll point its wings and look kind of like a broad wing, but
Mm-hmm.
it'll look too long winged.
Yeah.
You'll notice that the wing is overall longer with the broader tip, but the thing that I always note about red shouldered is it looks like they're reaching forward with open hands. They have
Hmm.
this sort of like
Yeah.
reaching
Yeah, I can
forward
see that.
look that a lot of tropical hawks have as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll notice in two of the shots there at the top, the pale crescent, which is the most looked for field
It's
mark
almost always
on a
there.
red-shouldered hawk. At some point, you'll see that this juvenile red-shouldered on the bottom left here, the bottom of the three on the left. You can't see that. You can't see that at all. But when the bird turns and it's got
Yeah.
the light behind it, those crescents come through.
Yeah, you can see it in that middle bird really well. That pale spot between the black wingtips and the slightly darker body of the wing. It's like yeah.
Yeah, John Lowry, one of our esteemed coworkers at ABA, said that he was taught that at a hawkwatch, if you first think it's an accipiter and then realize it's a buteo, it's a red-shouldered. And yeah, that's interesting because, and that is true. But also, if you can't decide between accipiter and buteo, it could be a American now
American
goshawk.
goshawk.
The most frequently confused pair, or at least the most frequently confused bird with American goshawk is red-shouldered.
We have a
Really,
comment in. Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah, American goshawk is a very beautyoine accipiter.
I
Very
don't know how long it's
chunky
going to take me to get that right just
American goshawk.
off the top
Yeah,
without
no more
catching
no
myself.
goes. It's a
I
no
know.
goes
I'm
and
so
no go.
used to. I'm so
An
used to
now.
no go.
Yeah. Absorbed in Nature notes in YouTube that West Coast red shoulders don't look like that. They do still have that crescent. I've noticed the West Coast red shoulders do. They always have the crescent, though it isn't always as obvious as the ones in the East.
Oh, they do
The
have
ones
the
in the East
shape
definitely.
too.
They do have the shape. Yeah, the shape doesn't change.
And
That's-
that was and the primary thing we're talking about here is the overall shape and structure.
Mhm.
But yes, red-shouldered hawk is one of those birds that has the Florida population, the West Coast population, and the bulk of the eastern population are plumage-wise rather distinct.
Yeah, the
And
California birds are beautiful,
oh
very
yeah,
brightly colored.
yeah,
I think the subspecies is elegans for a reason.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, neat
mm-hmm.
looking birds.
Okay, so yes, in here on this comp we have the two pictures of a broad-winged hawk on the right. We have three red-tailed hawks in the center, and three red-shouldered hawks on the left.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we're gonna go out west to Washington. And I knew you would love this bird as soon as I popped it up.
You put these things on here because people like conflict, Greg, and that's they want to watch us disagree about birds, and that's why you chose this one. Because
I make a point of picking one. If I can find one every time, I take it.
Yeah, you might as well.
So, okay, I'm going to tell you what
Mason Marin, he's finally here for a live one. Hey, Mason, how you doing?
Right on. So, we're just going to cut to the chase here because there's a lot to talk about with this bird. It's a warbler. We'll just
Indeed.
go there.
We agree on that.
We'll just go there and start.
We'll even agree on the genus of the warbler.
Well, yes, we will agree on the genus. We do agree. But I will tell you this, that when I first popped this bird up, I'm scrolling through and I saw that, my very first impression was Nashville warbler.
And I can see that.
It's got the stuff going on for Nashville warbler, but the thing that got me to Nashville warbler in the first impression is it's got an eye ring, it's got a gray head, and it's got that really sharp kind of short pointed bill.
Yeah,
but then
I agree. Nashville warbler is even.
But then look at the legs.
Nashville warbler is actually even sharper and smaller than this bird too. This one is a little big for a Nashville warbler, but the coloring. I've seen fall Nashville warblers that look a lot like this.
Absolutely. So, I mean, anybody who thought Nashville warbler, that is kind of look at just your first grab at this. That's the place your mind goes. But look at those legs. Look at those feet. That is not a Nashville warbler. Nashville warblers have little, thin, almost kinglet-like legs with little yellow feet, kind of like a ruby-crowned kinglet.
They do move like the ruby-crowned kinglets a lot. And I think that if we saw this bird hopping around in the brush, we probably wouldn't consider Nashville warbler it at all.
Not at all.
We would immediately be thinking, what is it now? Is it Geothlypus now?
Yes.
It used to be Operornis, but now it's Geothlypus, which is our ground-loving warblers. And for this bird, should we cut to the chase, Greg?
Well,
I think
I just popped up.
There are two species that we're kind of torn between.
Yeah, I just popped up a comp here, and as Tim Kalbach says, ignore that thin sharp bill, and yes, ignore that thin sharp bill because it's a product of the angle that the photograph is taken from, and you will notice here on the right, the top bird shows a very similar thin, sharp bill, whereas the bird on the bottom right kind of shows a heavier bill that you would more expect for this genus, and that is solely a product of the angle of the viewer. So on the right, on top, we have a McGillivray's warbler, and on the bottom, we have a mourning warbler, and on the left, we have the mystery bird in question.
So can we age this bird before we get going on it? Because I think that's important too.
Go for it.
Fall warblers, for the most part, look like washed out versions of the spring birds that we're also familiar with that are, famously illustrate various gift cards and calendars and all that stuff. So this bird, I think, though, is that horrible age group and sex that makes all of them really difficult. This looks like a first-year female bird to me. Just because it doesn't really show much pattern at all. If it were an adult male, I would expect to see some more gray on the chin. Maybe, depending on the species, I might see a little bit of black there on the upper breast. But the fact that this bird doesn't show much of anything, I think it's a first-year female, which are notoriously the most difficult warbler.
Yeah, and it's got those really. I mean, the feathers are in really nice shape.
They're
these are
very
new
clean
feathers. Look at the nice clean tips
molted
on those tail feathers. This bird's in very fresh plumage. So we get down to, is it a McGillivray's or is it a mourning? The default bird
in this corner.
The default bird in Washington would be McGillivray's. Mourning, I believe,
but mourning's not that far away.
Not that far away. it's now we're into eye arc versus eye ring,
That's pretty
and
much what it comes
white
down to, isn't it?
white throat versus yellow throat, pale
Yeah.
white lures versus yellowish or darkish. Now we're getting into some real nuance here,
Yeah.
and I, you know, every once in a while you got to walk away from a bird and just kind of be like, "Meh." I don't think those eye arcs or what could be eye arcs look strong enough for McGillivrays.
I see you and hear you. I think that they do look good enough for McGillivrays because I don't think that the ring goes all the way around. It's not super strong all the way around. I would call them more eye arcs than an eye ring, and especially in the front. And
Yes,
then, I don't know. I don't know. I
but
I will
it doesn't show. It really doesn't show. Now we only have the one photo, but it doesn't show
exactly.
any pale lures. But it's really yellow in the throat underneath,
It
and
is really no,
the
I
gray
agree with you
comes
on that. I
around
agree
and
with you on that.
looks like it might form that collar, which is kind of, you know, um,
There are some pretty yellow first year female McGillivrys.
there
I
are,
said
and
it's not
we
unheard of.
already we already went
Yeah.
there in our pre-production notes. The H word.
The H word. So McGillivray's and Morning Warbler are very closely related. It's basically eastern and western versions of a two species pair. They're sister species. There is a part of western Alberta, eastern British Columbia, where a lot of these birds come in contact with each other, and it makes what is called a hybrid zone, a stable hybrid zone. There's a lot of species that sort of meet in that area of the Northern Rockies. Myrtle warbler and audubons, probably most famously, but
Sapsuckers.
black sapsuckers, black-throated green, and Townsend's warbler. This is a space. This is a place where rules don't apply to species, and I don't know, like
Juncos.
juncos, and it's close enough to this part that to I guess this is Eastern Washington, right? This is close enough to this part of Washington that it wouldn't be completely unheard of that hybrid would be in the conversation. I don't know if it is, but this is a tough one for sure.
I think this is so tough from one photo that I wouldn't feel comfortable saying this is one thing or another based on this one photo.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I would agree with you
Because
on that.
as we say so often, we could get two or three more photos of the same bird that really would push it one way or the other.
Agreed.
Um,
Oh, recording
and
too. If you had your iPhone out and got a
yeah,
recording, that might sway you one way or the other. This is why it's important when you're taking photos of birds, especially birds that are slightly unusual or ones that you're having trouble with, to just if you have your camera with you, just put it in burst mode and smash that shutter button until your memory card is completely full. Get as many photos as you possibly can because you're never going to be sure exactly what field mark is going to be the determining field mark for one species or the other.
absolutely. A couple of
And this
comments
is a lovely
here.
photo, but it's still not enough.
It's exactly, and yeah, nothing wrong with the photo. But
Yeah.
Tim Callback says, he says the single photo problem is the main problem with this bird. He says he was
Agree.
photographing an
I agree.
Empedonyx flycatcher this morning, and it's amazing how the same eye ring presents differently in different photos, angles, and light conditions. And yes, this is absolutely true. And as we saw with the Vireo that we started off with, it was ambiguous at best as to whether it was one species or the other, but then a third photo, oh yeah, no more
Clarified it.
ambiguity.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some of that happening here. In putting the comp together, I tried to find birds at the same kind of angle, and
For sure.
everything,
Yeah.
and
No, it's nice. It's a nice comp.
but the
Observed in Nature and YouTube as first state record. According to Mason Marin in Facebook, there are two accepted records of mourning warbler in Washington.
yes,
He says so far. I'm not sure whether that means all time or this fall. It's also worth noting, he says, that it's been a very good fall for vagrant eastern passerines
mm-hmm.
in eastern Washington. So
So yeah,
another ambiguous piece of information to throw out there.
this is one of those birds that if this is all that we have to go on, in my opinion, it has to be left as a SPA, which
Yeah.
is how we say SP period for species. It is one of two species or a hybrid, but we really can't say definitively what it is.
Yeah.
And if there were
Tough
more
one.
photographs,
Tough one.
and I've seen birds of this genus that are really well photographed, and entire records committees can't agree on what they are. So these birds can be very hard to identify.
Two mourning warblers all time. Thanks, Mason.
In first year female plumage.
It's the toughest. It's the toughest warbler plumage. Like I take Roger Tory Peterson, R.I.P. To task for his confusing fall warbler plates, which I think wrecked the mentality of birders for the next several decades. To his credit, though, the quality of optical equipment that he was dealing with probably made a lot of those fall warblers very confusing compared to the stuff that we get to use now. But for many times, these first fall females, very much confusing fall warblers. They are the classic confusing fall warblers. Now,
Absolutely.
granted that they're a relatively small percentage of the birds that you're going to see, so you shouldn't go in with the mentality that all fall warblers are going to be very difficult, because not all of them are all that difficult. But every once in a while, you do run into these birds that make you go cross-eyed, and that's just birding for you.
But as Nate said, the best thing you can do is when you get a bird like this, where you're getting photographs like this, smash that shutter button and take as many
smash
pictures
the
of
shutter
that
button
thing.
like you're smashing the subscribe button on our feed.
The join and donate button. I'm going to use that.
Donate button.
I'm going to use that as the smash that join and donate button.
Smash it. Yep.
Okay.
Is there anything to that tail length field mark? Chris Ortega says there might be, but I think given the angle that bird is at, I don't think there's anything you can go on. It's a little bit foreshortened. I can't tell anything from that.
Yeah, and there's just everything about the angle of that bird, and the way that it is. And the yellow.
I don't want your photo, Mason. I don't want it. Does he got one? I don't want it. I don't want to deal with it. I want to deal with them. Mourning warbler is a very uncommon migrant, both in spring and fall, where I live in.
Same here
in North Carolina. I've seen every once in a while we get a spring bird that picks up in the Appalachians, because they're funny. The mourning warbler is a funny bird. They really like those kind of brambly, thorny thickets, like a blackberry thicket or whatever. That's where they breed, up in like Minnesota and all that, in southern Canada and all, and in that area. And that's where they put up in like the southern Appalachians. There'll be this little bald, and they'll be there. And there was one a few years ago that was singing for like 6 weeks before it finally decided that there were no other mourning warblers that were going to stop by. But fall mourning warblers are tough. They're fun. Tim Callback wants it. Send it to Tim. Tim's a glutton for punishment.
Right on. Well, we are ticking up on the hour here.
We did it, man.
We did it again.
15 minutes on Morning Birds with McGillivers.
If you if you like what we do here,
and who wouldn't,
over to aba.org/join and support this and reports like the Hurricane Idalia report and the ABA podcast and our magazines and everything that we do at the ABA, and that we love doing, and we rely on your support. So
Julio Acosta there in the comments, one of the complications we have in Central America is that they all come together from North America. Yeah, I don't envy you that. It's fun to go birding down there in the fall when you can augment your tropical species with a bunch of North American migrants. But I've been in places in Guatemala, for instance, where you've got black-throated green warbler and Townsend's warbler like right next to each other, and they're interacting. And in the winter they can be rather difficult. Western tanager, summer tanager, those you can tell. Well, the females are tough, but bars, but Yeah, you know how it is. There's a they all get mixed up when they go down there, and then they move on their separate ways when they move back north in the spring. Yes, please consider joining the ABA, aba.org/join. If you want to keep track on when we do these shows, go to the aba.org and scroll to the bottom and sign up for our Flight Calls newsletter. It comes to you every week. You'll get a heads up on when we do this. We'll probably be back in a couple weeks. We'll give you a heads up then, barring any sort of logistical confusion. Will Washington get its first American flamingo or Limpkin? I think Limpkin's more likely at this point.
Yeah, I would say Limpkin is far more likely at this point.
Yeah.
Whatever's
Flamingo's
going on
a one-shot
Limpkins.
deal. Yeah, I don't think you're going to get any hurricanes that make it all the way to Washington.
Yeah, we're going to go on here for just another second here since you brought that up, or I should say Mason brought that up.
2072.
I was commenting.
Are there going to be humans around to watch them?
I was commenting to my coworker. That's true. Last week, Illinois now has between 18
Derek
and
Bruff
20.
just joined a couple weeks ago. Glad to have you. Sorry.
Right on. Has between 18 and 20 Limpkins in the state right now, which is absurd. Absolutely absurd.
So I would have thought that here in North Carolina we would have gotten more Limpkins than everyone did, but I think part of the issue is they shot over to Louisiana and they got in the Mississippi River Delta, the Mississippi River system, and they're just following the river all the way up, and they're kind of going around us. Yeah, well, we do too, but we haven't had the Limpkins that everyone else is having in the South. I mean, they're in the Mississippi River drainage, and they are just blowing up that river system. And I think that if they get over into the Rio Grande system, which I think is probably going to happen in the next 5 years, then you're going to start seeing them in New Mexico, Arizona, California. They've already got them in Colorado. Nevada, can you believe it? Limpkins in Nevada. Imagine.
They're breeding in Texas now.
Yeah.
So, anyways, hot Limpkin summer and
Limpkin
what
forever.
Were you saying? Flamboyant
Limpkin
flamingo
future.
fall. I think it's time for us to go.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll be back in a couple weeks. Sign up for the newsletter and keep track of when we come back. But I think it's going to be in 2 weeks. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Yeah, we gotta find your mouse.
Well, I can't control the thing without my mouse.
Oh yeah. So we'll see you in a couple weeks. Join ABA. Listen to the podcast. It's free. Smash the subscribe button. All the YouTube jargon. We'll see you then. Good morning, everybody.